In the next beat, sometimes called the break into two, the new world beat, this is basically a moment when they are stepping into that new world. This can be a literal new world. This moment in the Matrix is when Neo makes the choice to wake up from the dream and enter reality. And he wakes up in a pod with robots, and he is literally in a completely different world than he was previously. So it can be literal, or it can be more of an emotional standpoint. For whatever reason, they are now unfamiliar in the familiar. It's generally something they aren't going to be able to reverse. The inciting incident has changed them. Not yet completely or in the way that we're going to have them change, but it has changed them, and it has changed things for them. Like I said earlier, they're generally going to have a new goal or a new plan from before. And by new plan, I mean they have the same goal, but they have a different way of achieving it. Because whatever happened at the inciting incident made it so what they were doing before wasn't going to work anymore. This is also the moment in your story, if you're doing a romantic plot, where your two characters who either hate each other if you're doing enemies to lover, or they kind of like each other but definitely don't want to go on have a relationship or anything like that, when they are forced to be together. They are forced to work together or partner together or interact with each other. This is going to raise the stakes for them, and it's going to define both of their goals, especially if their goals are in opposition and they have to work together even though they're in opposition. And make sure that whatever this is, whatever event has happened to make them forced to work together, it's something that can't be resolved by one or the other by themselves. But they have to resolve it together. The next beat is like the one earlier, it's called the no way beat. This is just a second reiteration of that, and that can either be your second love interest, especially if you're doing multiple point of views. That can be them reiterating that they don't want to fall in love for whatever reason, or it can be that if you're doing one point of view, it can be that same character again being like, no, this isn't going to happen. But this is weakening. The fact that they've had to say it again means that their resolve in that regard is weakening. The next beat is generally called the fun and games, and this is going to expand throughout a good chunk of your second act. And this is basically the premise that's going to be on the back of your book. So the competition is going to happen, the trials. This is where your subplots are going to be, your side arcs, your side characters are going to have their chance to shine here. So in Lord of the Rings, that is going to be, in the second Lord of the Rings movie, going after Pippin and Merry and breaking from the fellowship. Everything there ended up being side plots and subplots, because the main story in those movies is Frodo taking the ring to Mordor. One thing to note is you want to make sure that these subplots help develop your main character's skills that are going to help them defeat the main antagonist in their misbelief. I also generally in this section, and this will be more of a single beat for the romance side of things, I will include actually it can just be throughout this whole section, but through whatever's happening, the two love interests, they're starting to get a feeling, or if you're doing one main point of view, you're starting to get a feeling that maybe this isn't as bad as they thought it was. Maybe there could be something here and it might actually work. The arguments they had in those two no way beats, those start to get challenged here. And then going through that romance arc, continuing throughout scenes, you're going to want to show how their feelings are developing for each other and deepening for each other. They're going to begin to question their first opinions of each other, especially if this is enemies to lover, which makes sure that in an enemies to lover, you want them to become friends before they become lovers, just so it's more organic. You want to make sure that you understand what actions and what events are going to force them to realize that they were wrong the first time around about their opinions of this person. And then that's going to bring us to our third main story structure glue, and that is the midpoint. This is the halfway mark of our story. And this is generally a plot twist that's going to upend everything. It's going to make your protagonist or protagonists question everything up until this point. It's generally unexpected, and it's going to change the path that they are on, the method they're using. At this beat, it's important to know that they haven't fully changed, but they're starting to realize that they might need to change. This is when you start to shift from the character going after what they want and gravitating towards what they actually need. And this is also an important beat in a romance arc. This is generally when they start to think that it's going to work out and they can actually have it all, have this relationship, or they've fully realized that they're going to be fast friends. Basically, they're on that edge of that knife and they are falling in love, whether they admit it or not, or realize it or not, depending on how slow you want that arc to be. After the midpoint, you are going to want to have moments where you challenge that confirmation to each other in the midpoint, where they are friends, they start to like each other, they allow themselves to be vulnerable with each other. You're going to challenge that because they're not ready to transform yet. They aren't ready to tackle their own misbeliefs, and so that's getting in the way of them fully accepting and being vulnerable with the other. This doubt is going to deepen as the story unfolds until it's percolating in the back of their mind. And this is because as they shift from their want to their need, they are increasingly having to confront their misbelief and their flaws. This means they're going to instinctually fall back on their bad habits, which is going to interfere with their relationship. Because if, let's say, their misbelief is they aren't worthy of being loved, and then they're with this person who says they love them, well, they don't believe they're worthy of love, and then they're having to confront it and face that, and they don't believe that in their soul. They can't accept what the other person is giving them, and that's going to cause tension and conflict and doubt. And they're going to start doubting the person's sincerity and their actions, and begin to wonder if there's something else going on behind the scenes that they don't know yet. And if you have any further questions, drop them in the comments below. I will try to type and write more coherently than I speak. And note, this does not mean that there aren't a relationship and that relationship isn't growing, just that in the back of their head, they are doubting the relationship already. And this is, of course, going to lead to them retreating from the relationship. Eventually, their doubt is going to grow to the point where they do not want to step forward and proceed. They don't want the confirmation that they've been right this entire time. They don't want to risk realizing that they were correct and that they aren't worthy of love. And so they're not going to try at all. Now, this isn't going to just happen. There should be an actual event that causes them to have that trust broken. It should intersect with their internal beliefs, their lie. And then you want to consider how your protagonist or protagonists are going to express this. And after the midpoint, it's important to think about how your protagonist is going to react to whatever happened in the midpoint. And just like the inciting incident spawned, just as the inciting incident spawned a new goal for your character, the midpoint is also going to give them a new goal or a new plan to go after their goal. Generally, this is a good time to shift gears though, because like I said, they're going from their want to their need. But you basically want to establish how your character thinks this new plan is going to work, and why it's still not quite the right way to go about things. Because they're still not confronting their misbelief or their lie or the thing that's actually damaging their life. They're still trying to fix it with outside, usually material things. And then once this happens, you have a choice of, you can have another scene where you hint at the bad guys and that getting darker, the antagonist is getting closer, your character, your protagonist, they're getting closer to having to face their misbelief and actually confront that. And at the same time, they are also really putting up their guard in the relationship, if you have a relationship in your story. And they're really starting to put the brakes down for that. And a lot of the times this can happen because of like a worst case scenario. Whatever they were telling themselves in the no way beats maybe comes to pass. One beat that's kind of fun to do sometimes is it's a supposed victory beat. Basically, your main character thinks that they're about to get what they've wanted, what they've been striving for and going after this entire time, and they think they're going to get what they want, but they really aren't. And for this, you want to establish why do they think they've been victorious, and why do they think they're so close to achieving that goal. The next beat is the all is lost beat. This is the worst thing that could happen to your main character, and if you want to go back to that fear that we talked about in this video up here about character development, that is the worst thing that could happen to this character. This is generally rooted in their misbelief, and it is generally their fault because they have been ignoring what's actually wrong in their life and striving for this thing. Over here, it's been piling up and they've been making the wrong decisions and it backfires. So you want to make sure that this event forces them to confront their misbelief. It forces them to realize that they had a hand in having it happen. And you want to show the readers that this is rock bottom for your character. And at the same time, this is generally in a romance arc when the breakup happens, but this is when all of that doubt explodes and they call it quits. And after the all is lost moment, you're going to have, it's sometimes called the dark moment or the dark night of the soul. And this is basically their reaction. You had the inciting incident, and that was an action and an immediate reaction that happened to that. And then you have the debate, which is them reacting to the inciting incident and internalizing that. This is basically the same concept. You're going to have that all is lost, which is the event itself that happens to bring them to rock bottom. And then you have the dark night of the soul, which is where they have to internalize and come to grips with whatever happened. Sometimes your character will just react emotionally to this. Sometimes they'll attempt to return to their status quo, the old world, and then realize that they don't fit there anymore because they have grown and they have changed on this journey, just haven't finished yet. And then in a romance arc, this is generally the moment where your characters realize that they were kind of stupid for breaking up and they're actually more miserable now that they're not in the relationship because they never gave it an actual shot and it didn't fix what they thought was wrong. And then your character has a light bulb moment. They realize, and this can sometimes be called a catharsis moment, it can be the aha moment, but they finally realize what they've been missing. They finally realize why all of this is happening and why their decisions have been leading them down this path, what they need to do to actually fix their problems. So you want to think about how they overcome the lie and continue to the climax, and then make sure you understand what lesson they need to learn, which if you followed the character template video, that's going to be what their truth is. And this is going to lead into the climax, which is the battle scene between the big bad and the misbelief, that the internal battle with their misbelief and proving to themselves that they have actually changed and shifted. And this can be several scenes. It usually is several scenes. You can have them gathering the allies. You can have them preparing for the big battle, especially if your all is lost or dark moment had them ditching their friends, the people that were with them, or having them be left behind or betraying someone. With the all is lost moment, usually, most times, your character is going to end up alone because their actions have led them here and it is no one's fault but their own. And they've pushed all these people away and they've guarded themselves so closely, so tightly, that they didn't let anyone in. So now they're alone. In the climax moment, in this section of the book, they have to go mend the bridges they burned, or at least try to. Sometimes you won't be able to, and that'll be a learning lesson for them in and of itself. And once they get the group back together, once they make their amends, they say their sorries, they figure out what they need to do. They have to make the plan to do the do. They can't just bust into the bad guy's lair and win. They actually have to plan. And then, of course, you have them go and they fight the bad guy, and the bad guy almost wins. And then they dig deep inside themselves, and they make the decision based on their new truth, goes against their lie and their misbelief, and that lets them overcome the villain. This is also the section of your book where you'll have that grand gesture that we talked about in the last video to help mend that bridge, especially with the love interest, especially if there was any form of miscommunication or betrayal. Basically, this is them proving to themselves that they've transformed, and you want to make sure that it's going to help them win the battle. And then they win, at least the internal battle. Remember, your characters don't have to defeat every villain, and they're not going to. Especially if you're writing a series, you want to make sure that your characters are still transforming in each book, but you might leave it open-ended at the end and have another inciting incident kind of thing happen, another plot twist. But there should still be an internal battle that was won. And with the climax and the battle, make sure that however your protagonist defeats the bad guy or wins the battle, make sure that whatever your character does, it is informed by their truth and is very clearly different from what they would have done at the beginning of the book when they were being motivated by their misbelief and making their decisions based on that lens. And then finally, you have that final image, that resolution moment, which is just wrapping up loose ends, showing that they have won and what comes after, proving to the readers that the character has changed, showing how far the main character has come and how they're different. A lot of writers like to use the final image to mirror the opening image, but flip it on its head so you can see how their world is now right. And like I said, if you're writing a series, then this might be another plot twist moment, but you should still have some threads that close, some resolution here, but you can have a cliffhanger to lead into the next book. And then in that grand gesture beat around the climax, that is also generally going to be when they kiss. You have that first kiss scene, that epic kiss moment in a movie. That's generally where that's going to land. You also want to make sure you show how the two characters have changed on their own to better each other in a relationship and how they complete each other. And then in that resolution, that finale, in your romance arc, you also want to show how they are with each other now, how far their relationship has come. They're going to have a different perspective and a new way of looking at the world, and hopefully they'll be interacting very differently with each other than they did in their first introduction. You probably want a little bit of conflict here still, but just enough so that it's light and just enough to keep things intriguing. In some books, this is the wedding scene when it all comes to a head, or they're finally together, those scenes. Just anything to show how their connection has deepened and improved. And there you have it. That is the story structure that I've put together. I hope this helped. And like I said earlier, if any of these beats don't work with your story, as long as you have that backbone that we talked about in the prior video, as long as you have your character starting with status quo, have an event happen to force them out of their status quo and on the path of change, a midpoint to flip everything on its head and force them to realize that what they're doing isn't working, their want isn't going to satisfy their need. You want to have a moment that brings them to their greatest low and forces them to realize that they have made mistakes and it's generally their fault. The big climax scene, so them overcoming that misbelief, and then a resolution to wrap everything up and give that cathartic release and conclusion and closure to this arc that you've created. If you have all of those elements, then you will be set, and you can pick and choose any of the other things that might be helpful for you to keep you on track with your story. And yeah, do what works best for you, and let me know below if this was helpful. Until next time.